The first warning was the cattle. Caleb Meyer was hauling a bag of grit feed across the yard when every head in the south pen turned at the same instant and faced the same patch of pale morning sky, ears flat, breath stopped. He had farmed the long valley under Cinderfall Ridge for 31 years. He had seen cattle turn for thunder, for a wing shadow, for the smell of a long cat. He had never seen them turn for nothing. They turned for nothing now, and they did not turn back. He set the bag down. He did not run. Running was for younger men and for fools, and he had been neither for a long time. He walked fast to the porch, took the field glasses off the nail beside the door, and looked at the sky the cattle were looking at. There was a seam in the morning, a thin straight seam, west-southwest, where there should have been only the high pearl color of the valley sun coming up over the eastern wall. The seam was lengthening. He watched it lengthen for 2 heartbeats and knew what it was and what it meant and how many minutes he had. "Vay," he said quietly, into the air, not loud enough for any human ear to have caught. "Vay, get down." Inside the barn, behind the false wall he had built with his own hands 3 weeks ago, something the size of a small child stopped breathing. He took the porch steps 2 at a time and crossed the yard at a controlled lope, the way a man crosses a yard when the worst thing he has ever feared has finally arrived, and he refuses to give it the satisfaction of seeing him. Sprint. The barn door was already half open. He had left it that way on purpose every morning for the last 3 weeks, because a closed door was a thing strangers noticed and a half-open door was a thing nobody did. He slid through it, pushed it shut behind him with his hip, and dropped across from the iron cradle on the inside. "Vay," he said. "Out now." The false wall, between the second and third stalls, slid back a hand's breadth. A face looked out at him. The face had no nose to speak of, only 2 narrow slits above a flat dark mouth, and the eyes of it were the color of banked coals, deep red with a slow live orange at the center. The skin was the gray of cooled iron, and made the same small dry sound when it moved, like leaves brushing. The crown of the head was smooth and ridged in a single soft band from temple to temple. The child stood no higher than his belt buckle. The child looked at him the way the child had looked at him every morning for 21 days, like a creature that had not yet decided whether kindness was a trick. "Out," he said again. "Strike package. West-southwest. 8 minutes maybe." The child came out. The child came out the way the child always came out. Sideways, careful, one small hand keeping contact with the wall the whole way, the other hand closed around the little iron pin Caleb had given them on day 3. Caleb did not have time to be gentle with the moment. He crouched and put both his big calloused hands on the small gray shoulders and looked into the banked coal eyes. "They saw something," he said, "or somebody told. I don't know which. It doesn't matter. The seam in the sky is missiles. You understand missiles?" The child nodded once. The child understood missiles. The child had come out of a burning transport 3 weeks ago, and Caleb had been the one to pull them from the wreck. And any child who has come out of a burning anything understands missiles. "You stay with me," Caleb said. "You hear me? You stay with me until I say. You don't go to the door, you don't go to the window, you don't go anywhere I'm not. We are going down." "Down," the child said. The voice was a low scratch, hardly a voice at all, the way a small bell would sound if a small bell were trying not to be a bell. "Down," Caleb said. "Move." He took the child's hand. The child's hand was hot. It had been hot every day. The first day Caleb had pulled them from the wreck, the hand had been so hot, he had thought the child was burning to death from the inside, and then he had understood that the heat was simply what they were. The heat was now a thing he was used to, the way a man gets used to the feel of his wife's hand in his after enough years and stops noticing it as a separate thing. He led the child across the barn floor at a run. He had not built the false wall in the barn for nothing. Under the third stall, behind a layer of stamped straw and a layer of plank, there was a hatch. He kicked the straw clear with his boot, swung the plank up with his free hand, and the hatch beneath was a heavy iron ring set into a heavier iron lid. He had put that lid in himself in the second week. The morning after he had stood at the window with his coffee and seen, for the first time in his life, a Cassari scout drone hovering at the end of his pasture in the pre-dawn gray. He had taken his coffee out into the yard, calm as a Sunday, and waved at the drone the way a farmer waves at any passing thing, and the drone had hung there for a long, ugly minute and then flown away. He had finished his coffee. Then he had walked into town and bought the iron. The lid lifted. There was a ladder. There was a smell of cold earth. "Down," he said. "Quick now." The child went down. The child went down the way the child did everything, careful and silent, one small hand keeping hold of the iron pin and the other on the rungs. the live orange at the center of the coal eyes glancing back at him once before disappearing under the floor. He went down after them and pulled the lid shut over his head and dropped the inside bolt. The cellar was a long, narrow root cellar he had widened himself with a hand shovel over the course of the second and third weeks. It smelled of the iron oxide that came up through the clay of the ridge. There was a single hooded lantern on a peg, which he did not light. There was a steel shelf with 2 days of water and a wooden box of seed potatoes which had been there before any of this had begun. There was the long-worn quilt his wife had made the year before she died, folded on the bottom shelf, which he had not been able to bring himself to use as a quilt since, but which had become, over the last 3 weeks, the thing the child slept on. He took the quilt off the shelf without lighting the lantern, because he had memorized the cellar in the dark over the years, and did not need a lantern to find a quilt. He shook it out one-handed. The child stood very still in the middle of the cellar, watching him. "Sit," he said. "Down here. The wall behind me. Listen." The child sat where he had pointed, against the cold stone of the back wall, and pulled their thin gray knees up to their chest, the iron pin held in the lap. Caleb put the quilt around the small shoulders. He left his hand on the child's shoulder a moment longer than he needed to, because his hand on the shoulder of someone he was responsible for had always been the way he steadied himself, and he was a man who needed steadying in this particular minute and did not have time to admit it any other way. "I want you to do something," he said. "I want you to make yourself as small as you make yourself when the drones come. Smaller than that if you can. I want your heat down as low as you can take it." The child looked at him. "It's going to be hard," he said. I know what it costs you to put your heat down. You did it for me on the 2nd day when the patrol came. You did it for me on the 8th day. You can do it now. You hold it down until I come for you. You do not come up that ladder, no matter what you hear up there. You do not come up if I shout. You do not come up if the floor opens. You come up only when I open this hatch and say your name. Vay, you hear me?" "I hear you," the child said. "Good," he said. "Good child." He took his hand off the shoulder. He stood up. He turned for the ladder. He stopped halfway and turned back, because there was a thing he had meant to say to this child every day for 21 days, and had not yet said, and now there were perhaps 6 minutes between him and the seam in the sky, and he was going to say it. "You are not a weapon," he said. "Whatever they tell you, whatever they showed you in that transport, you are not a weapon. You are a child. You hear me?" The bank coals at the center of the eyes brightened a fraction, the way a fire brightens when a man bends close to it with his face and breathes. "And I hear you," the child said. "Good," he said. "Hold it down." He went up the ladder. He climbed back into the barn and pulled the lid shut and dropped the plank back over it and kicked the straw across the plank. He did it fast, but he did it the way a farmer does anything fast, which is to say without losing any of the steps. He had perhaps 5 minutes now. He crossed the barn floor and looked through the gap at the top of the door, and the seam in the sky was much longer than it had been, and there were 3 thin bright marks moving along its lower edge that had not been there before. 3, not 1, 3. He had thought in the cellar that they might have been content with 1. 1 was an erasure. 3 was a message. 3 meant somebody at the other end of the targeting console wanted to make sure that whoever was hiding what they thought he was hiding learned the lesson of having tried. He stepped out of the barn into the yard. He did not bother to close the barn door behind him. He walked into the middle of the yard, away from the house, away from the barn, away from anything that mattered, and he stood there in his work boots and his old gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, and he looked up at the seam in the sky and he waited for it to notice him. He did not have long to wait. The thin straight line in the morning broke. One of the 3 bright marks separated from the seam and slid down toward the valley at an angle that did not belong to anything natural, the long curl of its descent shedding a fine white vapor that did not belong to anything natural either. The other 2 marks held position above the seam, watching, the way the older animals in a pack watch the youngest one make the kill. He raised his right hand. He did not wave. He simply raised it, palm out, the way a man raises a hand to a neighbor he can already see coming up the lane. He raised it slowly, because the man at the other end of the targeting console, if there was a man, if there was anything that thought of itself as a man, was watching him through a glass, and he wanted that watcher to see very clearly that the man in the yard knew what was happening and was choosing not to run. The first mark grew. It became a body. The body became a shape. The shape became a long matte cylinder with 3 short fins at the rear, and a snub blunt nose that ate the morning light without giving any back. He had not seen a Kasari ground purge munition before. He had seen the diagrams in the colony bulletins when they had been distributing the diagrams to make sure nobody in the outer holds ever did anything that would warrant one. He recognized the shape. It came down very fast. It also came down at a slight angle which surprised him for a moment, and then did not. They were not going to drop it on his house. His house and his barn and his cellar would all be on the receiving end of whatever it did when it stopped, but they were not going to put it through the roof. They were going to put it in the yard, between him and the barn, because they wanted to see who came out of which structure when the ground heaved. They wanted to flush. They wanted the child to flush out of the barn and run toward him so they could put the second one on the running child. He understood it the way he had once understood in the second year of his marriage, that his wife was going to live and the doctor was wrong. Sometimes a thing comes into a man's head whole, and he does not need to argue with it. He did not move toward the barn. He turned, calmly. He turned his back on the falling cylinder. He started to walk at the same controlled lope as before, away from the barn, away from the cellar, toward the open south pasture, where the cattle were still standing, turned and staring at the wrong piece of sky. He walked fast enough that anybody watching through a glass would see a man running, but he did not run, because the cylinder had a brain, and the brain was watching for a running man, and a walking man at a brisk pace looked to a brain that was looking for panic, like a man trying to manage his panic. A managed panic could be redirected. A panic toward the south pasture was a panic away from the barn, and that was what he wanted. He kept walking. The cylinder hit the yard. It did not hit where he had been standing. It hit 15 paces behind him, where the well cover was, and the well cover went away, and the ground heaved up in a long, soft pillow of red dirt and stone, and the heat came over him in a single full slap that lifted his shirt off his back, and then the sound came, and then there was no sound at all for several seconds, and he was on his face in the south pasture, and the cattle were running, and one of them was running on 3 legs. He pushed himself up on his elbows. His mouth was full of dirt. His left ear was full of a high, steady whistle that he understood he might not be free of for the rest of whatever he had left of his life. His shirt was smoking along one shoulder where a spark had landed. He patted it out with the heel of his hand without looking at it. He looked at the yard. The yard was a crater. The barn was still standing. The barn was leaning, but it was standing, and the door he had left open was still open, and nothing small had come running out of it. Good child, he thought, with what was nearly the last clean thought he had time for. Good child. He looked at the sky. The 2 other marks were still at the seam. They were moving now. They were sliding down the seam the way the first one had, in 2 long curls of white vapor. 2 more. Of course 2 more. They had not gotten what they wanted with one. He got up. He stood. He swayed once and then steadied, because his legs were a thing he had owned for 56 years, and they remembered what they were for. He walked back across the yard. He walked across the lip of the crater, because there was no other route to the barn, and the heat of the crater came up through the soles of his boots, and through the soles of his feet and into his calves, and he walked through it because a man going to a child does not stop for the heat of a crater. He crossed the yard. He pushed the leaning barn door open with his shoulder and went in. "Vey," he said. "Stay down." 2 more. "Stay down." He did not wait for an answer. He turned and went back out into the yard and stood in the same spot as before, in the wreck of his well cover, with the 2 bright marks already a third of the way down the seam, and he raised his hand again. "Here," he said, not loud, the word for himself more than for anything else. Here is the man. Here is the bad farmer. Come look at the bad farmer." The comm on his belt buzzed. He had forgotten about the comm. He had not used the comm in 3 weeks. He had not turned it off either, because turning it off was a thing the patrol would have noticed. He took the comm off his belt without taking his eyes off the sky. "Meyer." The voice was a Kesari voice through a translator band, flat and clean, with a small grit at the back of the consonants that the Kesari larynx put into every human language. "Caleb Meyer, step away from your structures. Step into the open field. We see you. You have 1 minute." "You see me," he said. "Good morning." "Meyer," the voice said, "we have authorization. The munitions are inbound. You have an opportunity to live. Step away from the structures and surrender the asset. Repeat, surrender the asset. 60 seconds. "You named me," he said, "on your records. How long have you known the asset was here, Captain?" "Just curious. I'd like to know." The voice was silent for a half a heartbeat. He had not expected an answer. 11 days, the voice said. He let out a long, slow breath through his nose. 11, not 21, 11, he had thought, maybe, in the worst hours of the worst nights of the last week, that the cattle drift on the pasture had been somebody watching him, and he had told himself he was a paranoid old man. He had not been a paranoid old man. He had been a man who had been watched for 11 days by a captain in a Kessery ship who had been making up her mind. 11 days, he said, and you waited until this morning to bring 3 of them. Surrender the asset, the voice said. 40 seconds. You sent 3, he said. Why 3? I'd like to know that too. Standard protocol for recovery of a Tier 1 asset. You did not send 3 because of protocol, Captain. You can read your own protocol books. Protocol calls for 1 with a backup. You sent 3 because somebody on your bridge stood up and said, "Ma'am, what if the human will not run?" And you said, "Then we will make sure the human cannot." You sent 3 because you were afraid of 1 farmer in a yard with 1 child. You hear me, Captain? You were afraid of 1 farmer. You were afraid because you knew, on some quiet level a captain is not allowed to know things on, that the child was a child. You were afraid you would have to look, afterward, at what 1 ground purge munition does to a child, and you thought if you sent 3 you would not have to look at the body because there would not be a body. You sent 3, Captain, so you would not have to be a person who had killed a child. You would only have to be a person who had purged a target. He stopped. He breathed. That is what 3 meant. I am going to give you the next 40 seconds of my mouth. I am going to spend them telling you about the child. Her name is Vay. She holds the iron pin I gave her like it is a doll. She sleeps on my wife's quilt. She is afraid of the patrol drones, and she is afraid of the cold, and she is afraid mostly that I will get tired of her. She is a child. You are about to find out what kind of person you are by what you do in the next 40 seconds. I cannot help you with that. I am only telling you. The clock is your clock now. Surrender the asset. The asset is a child, he said. I know what you were calling them. Warbloom, Vector Survivor, whatever the word is on your manifest. The asset is a child. I have had them under my roof for 21 days. They have eaten my bread and slept on my wife's quilt. They are not a weapon. You are. Meyer, 30 seconds. You know what's funny, Captain? He said, and he found that he was smiling in a thin, angry way with his face turned up to the sky. If you had come down here and knocked on my door 3 weeks ago and said, "Caleb Meyer, we have lost a child of ours, and we believe she may be on your land, and we would like her back so we can take her home," I would have given her back. I would have walked her down to your transport myself. I am not a fool. I do not steal other people's children. The voice was silent. But you didn't come down, he said. You sent drones. You sent a scout. You sent 3 ground purge munitions before you ever knocked. So now I am going to tell you something, Captain. The child stays here. The child stays here because somebody has to be the kind of person who does not hand a child over to the people who only ever brought missiles. You hear me? You hear me, Captain? The 2 marks were halfway down the seam now. He could see with his unaided eye the shape of them. Meyer, the voice said, 20 seconds. Tell your gunners, he said, to aim well. The child is in the cellar under the barn. The cellar is reinforced. You will not get her with 1. You may not get her with 2. I am between the barn and the open field. If you put your second munition on me, you have 1 left for the barn, and you better hope it is enough, because if it is not enough, then she will come up out of that cellar, and you will have to look at what you have done to a child. He stopped. He was breathing hard. He had not meant to speak that much. He had not spoken that much to anyone in years. Meyer, the voice said. The voice had changed. The flat, clean Kasari voice had taken on a small, uncertain edge. Aim well, he said. Goodbye, Captain. He clicked the comm off and dropped it in the dirt. The 2 marks were almost on him. He stood in the wreck of the well cover, with his face turned up to the sky, and he thought, in a quiet, plain way, of his wife. He thought of the morning she had told him she did not want to die in a hospital, and he had taken her home from the hospital that same afternoon in the truck with the window down. He thought of the way she had laughed when he had carried her in over the threshold like a bride. He thought of the smell of her hair on the last morning. He thought of the way she had said, when he had asked her, near the end, what he was supposed to do without her. She had said, "You do exactly what you are, Caleb. That is all you ever have to do." He thought of that. He thought of the child in the cellar. He raised his hand to the sky 1 more time, in case the captain was still watching, in case the captain was still trying to make up her mind, in case the captain was not actually a thing that had finished making up its mind a long time ago. The barn door opened behind him. He did not know it had opened at first. He felt the heat The heat at his back went up the way the heat had gone up since in the cellar when the child had laid their small hand on the iron pin and the pin had glowed. It went up more than that. It went up in a long, warm wave that moved past him and into the air, and the air went sweet with it, the way air goes sweet just before a hot, dry storm breaks. He turned. The child was in the doorway of the barn. The child was standing in the doorway of the barn with the quilt fallen behind them in the dust, and the iron pin held up in the small gray fist over their head, and the iron pin was no longer iron. It was a long, thin thread of yellow-white light that the child held the way a child holds a candle, and the child was looking past him, up at the seam in the sky, and the banked coals at the center of the coal eyes were not banked any longer. They were live. "Vay," he said. "No, get back." "You said I am a child," the child said in the low scratch voice. Only the voice was no longer a scratch. The voice had a small bell sound in it now, a small clean bell. "You said I am not a weapon." "Yes," he said. "Yes, that's what I said. Get back. Get back in the cellar. Get back. You said you are between us and them," the child said. "I am between us and them now." "Vay, you held my hand when it was hot," the child said. "Nobody held my hand when it was hot. They put me in a tube. You held my hand." The child walked past him. The child walked past him in a small, slow, careful way, the way they had always moved, sideways and watchful, but the child did not look at him as they went past, and the child did not stop when he reached for the small gray shoulder. His hand went through the air where the small gray shoulder had been. The heat coming off the child now was the heat of a furnace door, not a child's hand. "Vay," he said. "Vay, stop. I am asking you to stop." "I am sorry," the child said very quietly. "I cannot stop. They will only send more. I know what I am. I have always known. I did not want to know in front of you because you said I was a child, and I wanted to be a child a little longer. I was a child for 21 days. Thank you." The child stepped into the middle of the yard. The child stepped onto the lip of the crater. The child raised the long, thin thread of yellow-white light over their head, and the light grew, the way a fire grows when a man feeds it suddenly, and the light became a sheet, and the sheet became a sky-colored thing, a sky inside the sky, that climbed up off the small gray fist and stood between the child and the two falling marks, like a held shield made of mourning. He went to his knees. He went to his knees in the dirt of his yard because his legs did not consent to keep him up, and because his body remembered before his mind did that a man on his knees is harder to knock down than a man on his feet. He watched the two falling marks come down. He watched them hit the held shield of mourning that stood up from the child's hand. The first one stopped in the air. It stopped the way a thrown stone stops when it hits a hand. It did not explode. It did not detonate. It stopped and held there in the air 10 feet above the yard and trembled. The trembling was the bad part. The trembling was the thing inside the munition trying to do the thing it had been built to do, and the held shield of mourning telling it, very politely, that it was not going to do it. The second one stopped right behind the first. The child took one step forward. The held shield of mourning grew. It took in the two stopped munitions and it folded around them. The trembling inside the munitions grew louder. The smell in the yard changed. It was no longer the sweet hot storm air. It was something cleaner, something that smelled almost the way the chapel had smelled the morning he had married his wife, when the candles were fresh and the doors were open and the wind had come through. "Vay," he said. His voice was very small. He could not hear himself with his right ear at all. "Vay, come back." The child did not turn around. "It is fine," the child said. "I am going to take them all the way. They cannot have the field. They cannot have you. Vay, you are a good man. Caleb Meyer." He had not heard the child say his name. The child had said his name once on the first day when he had told them his name, and the child had repeated it the way a child repeats a foreign word, and never since. The child said it now with the small, clean bell sound and the live coal light coming up out of the eyes. The held shield of mourning compressed. It compressed around the two stopped munitions and around the seam in the sky above them and around the third bright mark that had not yet started its descent and that he saw now was making a slow, careful turn at the seam to come back up, because the captain in the ship had finally made up her mind, in the very last available second, that she did not want to send the last of her ground-purge munitions into the thing happening in the farmer's yard. The captain had made up her mind too late. The held shield of mourning gathered the two munitions and the seam in the sky and the third mark and the third mark's careful turn, and the child closed the small gray fist on the iron pin that was no longer a pin, and the world went white. He did not lose consciousness. He thought afterward that he should have. The white came up like a tide, and it did not knock him down because he was already down, on his knees in the dirt of his own yard, and the white poured over him in a soundless, heavy wave. And the wave was warm, and it was a good warm, the warm of a kitchen at the end of a long winter day, and inside the wave he saw, the way a man sees things in a fever, his wife in the chapel and the cattle still running on 3 legs and the small gray face in the doorway of the barn with the quilt fallen behind them. He saw all of those things at once. He saw them, and he did not weep because he was not a weeping man, but he did make a sound at the back of his throat that he would not have wanted any other living thing to have heard. The wave passed. The yard was quiet. He pushed himself up off his knees with his palms in the dirt. The dirt was warm. The whole yard was warm, the way a piece of bread is warm right out of the oven, and the warmth went down through the soles of his boots and into the marrow of his bones and would stay there, he understood, for some time. He looked up. There was no seam in the sky. There were no marks. There was only the high pearl color of the valley sun finishing its climb over the eastern wall, and a single thin curl of clean white smoke standing straight up from the middle of the yard, where the child had been, and the curl was not the smoke of a fire. It was the kind of smoke that comes off a candle a moment after it has been blown out. He walked across the yard. He did not run. He walked. He walked the way a man walks toward something he has known he was going to have to walk toward since the first morning. The cattle in the south pasture were standing again. The one on 3 legs had stopped running and was watching him, calm as anything, with the patient look that cattle have when they have decided that the worst of a thing is over and the part where the man fixes them is about to start. He reached the place where the child had been. There was a small, soft pile of pale ash on the dirt. He went down on one knee beside it. He took off his work glove with his teeth and held the bare palm of his right hand over the ash, the way a man holds his hand over a coal bed to feel if it is dead or only sleeping. The ash was warm. He held his palm there. He did not move it. He breathed slow, in through his nose and out through his mouth, the way he had taught himself to breathe in the year after his wife died, when the breathing had been all he had been able to do. He breathed, and he held his hand over the ash, and he waited for what he was waiting for, and he did not entirely know what he was waiting for until the ash in the very center gave back a small live red, a single ember. It was no bigger than a seed. He cupped his hand around it. He bent low to it, the way a man bends his face to the small embers of a fire he is trying to coax back, and he breathed once, softly, across the ember, and the ember brightened. He blew again. It brightened more. He took from the inside pocket of his shirt the small clean handkerchief his wife had embroidered for him with his initials, the one he had not used as a handkerchief in 8 years, and had not let out of his shirt either. He spread the handkerchief on the ground. He worked the ember in the small, soft pile of ash very carefully with the side of his thumb onto the handkerchief. He folded the 4 corners up. He held the bundle in the bowl of his 2 hands. He stood, he turned, he walked toward the barn. The barn door was still open. The doorway was empty. The quilt was where the child had let it fall. He bent without setting the bundle down, hooked the quilt up over his shoulder, and carried it and the bundle together into the barn, and into the stall, and to the false wall, and through the false wall, and down the ladder into the cellar. The lantern was still off. He did not light it. He sat down on the cold earth of the cellar floor with his back to the back wall, in the same spot where the child had sat. He laid the folded handkerchief on his knee. He laid his palm over it lightly, the way he had laid his palm over his wife's hand in the last hour of her life, so that she would know, without his having to find the words for it, that he was there. He sat that way for a long time. He sat there while somewhere very far above and very far away, a Kesari captain on a Kesari bridge was telling her crew, in her flat, clean voice, that the strike had concluded with an unanticipated outcome, and that the ground purge munitions could not be recovered, and that the asset could not be located on post-strike scan. He sat there while she ordered the bridge sealed. He sat there while she sat in her command chair with her 3 long fingers laced and stared at the strip of green afterimage that her targeting glass had left across the inside of her eyelids, and tried for a long time to understand what she had just seen. She did not entirely understand, but she had been a captain for a long time, and she had given a great many orders, and she had not until this morning given an order that she found she could not afterward sit easily with. She sat with it. She would sit with it for some time. The comm on Caleb Meyer's belt, lying in the dirt of the yard above, did not buzz again that morning. It did not buzz that afternoon either. It would not buzz at all for 3 days. On the evening of the first day, a colony patrol skimmer came up the long road in the dusk with its running lights at the lowest setting, and stopped at the gate without coming through. 2 officers in field gray climbed out. They were colony men, not Kesari. They were men he had known the names of for 20 years, though he had not had cause to use either name in some time. The taller one was Hadron Cole, who had been a deputy when Caleb's wife was first sick, and who had driven her, twice that bad winter, to the colony hospital at the head of the valley when Caleb's truck had been frozen in. The shorter one was a man called Pell, who had grown up 2 ridges over and who Caleb had taught when Pell had been a boy how to splint a calf. They came up the path on foot. They stopped at the porch the way the captain would stop at the porch 2 days later, only without the captain's tired knowing. "Caleb," Hadron said. "Hadron, we came to see if you were alive. I am alive. We saw the seam in the sky from town this morning. We watched it close. We have been arguing about who got to come up. I won." "You always did," Caleb said. Hadron looked at the crater in the yard. He looked at the leaning barn. He looked at the dust on the toes of his own boots. He did not look, Caleb noticed, at Caleb's hands. Caleb's hands were folded in front of him, around nothing visible, and a man who had known Caleb for 30 years could see the shape of a folded handkerchief inside the bowl of those hands without needing it shown. "You want to tell me what happened up here this morning?" Hadron said. "No," Caleb said, "I do not." Hadron nodded once. He had expected that answer. He had been a deputy, and then a sheriff, and then a colony administrator's senior officer for 30 years, and he had learned, somewhere in the middle of that long road, that the answer he most respected from a man like Caleb Meyer was the answer that closed the door. "Will you tell me if you are in any further danger?" he said. "I do not believe I am," Caleb said. "Will you tell me if you have any need of anything we can bring up the road?" "I will," Caleb said. "I will need a hand with the well, not tomorrow, the day after. There is no hurry." "All right," Hadron said. "We will come up the day after tomorrow. We will bring a hand." "Bring Pell," Caleb said. "He is the only one of you who knows which end of a shovel is the down end." Pell, beside Hadron, allowed himself the smallest expression that men of his kind ever allow themselves. It was not quite a smile. It was the small lifting at the corner of the mouth that, in colony men, did the work of a smile and was understood by other colony men to mean the same thing. "I will come up," Pell said. Hadron looked at Caleb a long moment. He had a question that he had been carrying up the road in his throat for the entire ride from town, and Caleb could see it sitting in his throat, and he did not ask it. He folded it back down. He put his hand on Pell's shoulder briefly and turned. "Day after tomorrow," he said. "Caleb." "Hadron." They walked back down the path. They got in the skimmer. They went. The running lights on the skimmer were so low that, 100 paces down the road, the skimmer was already most of the way to invisible in the dusk, and the only thing Caleb could see of his 2 old friends was the faint warm line of the heater element under the dash, moving away from him through the gathering dark. He stood at the porch a while after they had gone. The dusk thickened. The first of the small frontier stars showed. He went inside. He fed the kettle and drank a cup of plain hot water, because he was not yet ready, that evening, to drink anything stronger, and not yet ready, that evening, to sit at the table where the second cup waited. He carried his cup out onto the porch. He sat in the rocker his wife had liked. He held the cup in his lap, and he watched the long valley settle into night. After a while, he took the folded handkerchief out of his shirt and laid it on the arm of the rocker, where his wife had used to lay her hand when they had sat out together in the spring after the day was done. He laid his own hand over the handkerchief very lightly. "It is the end of the first day," he said. "There were 2 old friends. They came to see if I was alive. They will be back to dig the well. The captain has not called. She will. She is thinking. She thinks slow. I think slow too. We are going to make a slow shape of it. You rest, child. I will sit out a while." The ember warmed against his palm. He sat that way until the small front stars had stopped showing one by one and had come all the way out in the wide, hard scatter of stars he had known his whole life. And then he carried the cup back inside, and the handkerchief with it, and he set the handkerchief on the saucer of the second cup, and he went to bed in the small back room and did not, that night, dream of the seam in the sky. On the morning of the second day he walked the south pasture. He counted the cattle. They were all there. The 3-legged cow had moved a little in the night and was standing with her good side to the rising sun in the way that cattle on 3 legs do, balanced on the diagonal, and she looked at him as he came up with the patient, calm look she had always had, and that the morning before had been the same. He set the splint that day. He set it slowly. He talked to the cow the way he had always talked to his cattle, in the low, quiet voice he had learned from his father, and he set the splint, and he watered the cow, and he watered the other cattle, and he walked back across the south pasture to the yard, and to the leaning barn, and to the cellar, and he sat for a while in the cellar with the handkerchief in his hand, and did not say anything, because he had nothing to say that he had not said the night before. On the morning of the third day, Pell came up the road early, on foot, with a long shovel over his shoulder and a roll of well pipe under his arm, and the same small, not quite smile he had had at the porch, and the two of them did not say much, because there was not much that needed saying between men who had been raised in the same valley, and who had both lost wives in the same bad decade, and who knew how to dig a well without conversation. They dug. The morning got hot. Caleb's back complained, as he had told the child it would, and he worked through the complaint, as he had told the child he would. By midday they had cleared the cap. By the time the sun began its long fall toward the western ridge, they had the new pipe in the ground and the wellhead reset, and Pell had drunk 3 cups of plain hot water at the kitchen table, and looked twice at the second cup with its saucer and its folded handkerchief, and had not said a word about it. Pell left at dusk. He shouldered his shovel, and walked back down the road and did not look back, because colony men did not look back. Caleb watched him until he was a small dark line at the foot of the road, and then he was nothing. He went back into the house. He sat at the table. He took the second cup down, off its hook for the second time in days, and set it on the table. He laid his palm over the handkerchief on the saucer, and the ember inside the handkerchief was warm and was waiting, and had been waiting all afternoon while he had been outside digging in the dirt with an old friend. He had not, in the digging, forgotten the child. He had carried the child with him in the bowl of his shirt pocket all day. But there was a thing he had learned again in the digging that he had been forgetting for 3 weeks while he had been a man hiding a child in a barn. The thing was this, that a man who keeps a thing alive must also keep the world alive around it. A man who hides a child in a barn and forgets the well is a man whose well eventually runs dry, and then he loses the child to thirst. He had not lost the child to thirst. He was not going to lose the child to anything else now. He drank his cup of plain hot water. He sat there a while longer. He waited. While he waited, he did a thing he had not done in 8 years. He took down the small leather book from the high kitchen shelf, where it had sat untouched since the funeral, and he laid it on the table beside the second cup. The book had been his wife's. She had written in it, in her small slanting hand, every evening of their last good summer, and she had asked him, on the worst of the last bad days, to take it down once a year and read a page. He had not been able to take it down at all. He took it down now. He opened it. He did not read the page he opened to, because the page he opened to was the one she had written on a Sunday morning in their garden, and he was not ready yet to read it. He laid his hand flat on the open page so that her ink lay against the heel of his palm. He sat that way for some minutes. She wrote in this, he said, to the handkerchief and the saucer. Every night, the summer before the year she went. I have not been able to read it. I am going to read it now, not all at once. 1 page at a time, a page a day. That is the kind of the man can build a year on. A page a day, a cow a week, a row of beans a season, a child for 21 days. You are part of the count now. You hear me? The ember warmed against the cloth. All right, he said. All right. He closed the book gently. He set it back on the shelf at eye level this time, where he would see it every morning when he reached for the kettle. He sat back down at the table. He turned his cup in his hands. Outside the kitchen window, the third day was finishing. The sun was almost down on the western ridge, and the long valley was filling, the way it always filled in the last hour, with the soft level gold light that his wife had loved, and that, after she had gone, he had stopped letting himself look at for a long time. He let himself look at it now. He let himself look at it the way he had looked at it with her 20 years ago, leaning on the porch rail in their first summer, before they had known any of what would come, and the gold light came in over the windowsill and laid itself across the kitchen table, and across his hand, and across the saucer and the handkerchief, and the small live red of the ember inside the handkerchief, and the gold and the red mixed for a moment, and it was the gentlest thing he had seen in a long time. He sat in the gold light a while. Then the calm on his belt buzzed. He did not jump. He had been waiting for the buzz for 3 days, and the buzz, when it came, was a thing he had already met half the way. He took the calm off his belt. He thumbed it. Meyer, he said. It was not the captain. It was a colony administrator, a man Caleb had known for 20 years, who had been at the meeting in town when the diagrams of the ground purge munitions had been distributed, and who had voted against distributing them. Caleb, the man said. The man's voice was very tired. Caleb, there's a delegation coming up your road. 3 vehicles. Kesari. They're not armed. The captain is in the lead vehicle. She has asked officially for permission to enter your yard. She has asked me to ask you. She has asked me to tell you also that she has resigned her commission. As of the day of the incident, she is no longer a Kesari officer. She is here as a person. He listened. He did not answer for a moment. Tell her she can come up, he said. Tell her she can come into the yard. Tell her not to come past the porch. Caleb, the administrator said. Caleb, you understand, this is the only Kesari officer who has resigned in 14 years. She does not have any standing left. She is here on her own. I understand, he said. You will speak to her. I will speak to her, he said. Tell her to leave her bodyguards and sidearm at the gate. She will. Caleb, there is a Kesari cruiser in low orbit, not sent by her. Skywatch has it holding a firing pattern. 2 ground purge missiles ranged on your valley since dawn. 40 minutes, maybe an hour. He had known this the way a man knows weather. He sat with his hand on the handkerchief. The ember was very warm. It had known since dawn, and had not said, because it had wanted him to have his morning with the well and his evening with the gold, and he put his other hand flat on the table to keep his shoulders from shaking. All right, he said. We will meet a woman. After that we will see. He carried the saucer onto the porch and set it on the rail in the last gold and stood on the top step and waited. The lead vehicle stopped at the gate. A woman got out, small, gray-haired, limping, her empty hands held out at her sides. She stopped at the foot of the steps. Mr. Meyer. Captain, he said. Not anymore, all the same. She looked past him at the saucer. Her face did not change, but something behind it did, like a deep pond under wind. It is alive, she said. It is, I am sorry. I came to say it where it could hear me, and to stand in the yard until the missiles came. I ask only that. He looked at the western ridge, where the gold was almost gone. Come up, he said. There is 40 minutes. She came up, she sat, he sat. The handkerchief warmed, and the small bright thing inside it lifted and uncurled, no longer an ember but a shape, 4-limbed and luminous, sitting upright between them like a third person at a table. The woman put her hands over her mouth and did not make a sound. Hello, the child said, in Caleb's voice, the only voice it had heard, and the woman closed her eyes and tears went down her face without expression. Hello, she said. The child looked at Caleb. It looked up at the sky. It looked back, and Caleb understood that it knew about the cruiser and the missiles and the 40 minutes, and that it had a thing it wanted to do and was asking. No, he said quietly. No, you stay. I will go. The child did not answer in words. It laid one small luminous hand on the back of his wrist, and through that warmth he understood that a being like the child could, in last extremities, make of itself a thing the cruiser's sensors would read as worth more than a valley, could, by lifting into the cold dark, draw the fire off the ground and onto itself, could do this once, and only once, and could not be talked out of it, because it had been deciding since dawn. No, he said again. He said it the way a man says a word he knows will not be heard. You are 21 days old. I am 62. I am the one who goes. The child looked at him, and in the look was every word his wife had ever written in the leather book, and he understood that the child had read the book through his hand that afternoon, and had taken from it the one line his wife had asked him to remember. That love is the thing that goes first into the cold, so the other one does not. Have to, Caleb, the woman said very low. Caleb, it is already going. It was. The small luminous shape lifted off the saucer and hung a moment above the rail in the last of the gold, and the gold went through it and came out something quieter and older. It looked at him. A page a day, it said in his own voice. A cow a week. A row of beans a season. You are part of the count now, you hear me? I hear you, he said. He could not see for a moment. Go. It went. It rose. Slowly and then not slowly. Past the porch roof and the oak and the western ridge, into the cold dark where the cruiser waited. A long minute passed in which neither of them moved. Then, very high where the first stars were, there was a soft white blooming that was not a star, and after it a second, and then the sky was only sky again, and the valley was whole, and the saucer held only a folded handkerchief with nothing inside it. Caleb sat a long time. The woman sat beside him and did not go. After a while he picked up the handkerchief, folded it the way he had folded it the first night, and put it in the pocket over his heart. A page a day, he said, to the empty saucer, and to the dark valley, and to the small bright thing that had gone first into the cold so he would not have to. I am still counting. The first stars came out over the ridge. He sat on his own porch and counted them.